Welcome to the We Talk Careers podcast, brought to you by Women in ETFs. This is Kristine Delano, and I'm thrilled you've joined us. If you're pursuing excellence in your own career or intrigued by the hustle required to make it to the top, this podcast is for you. This is season 6, and we are dropping in on leaders across the globe. We're going to learn how to balance, how to speak truth to power, and how to have fun doing it. So put aside that massive to-do list and let's get inspired. I am looking forward to this conversation with Jane Edmondson. She is the head of index product strategy at TMX Redefine. And we're talking pivots, mistakes, and the way we find a success that is uniquely our own. Welcome, Jane, to the We Talk Careers podcast.
Thanks very much, Kristine.
I am so glad to have you here. So why don't you give a little introduction to our listeners?
As you mentioned, I'm the head of index product strategy at TMX Redefine. But previously, I was an entrepreneur of sorts. I founded my own boutique index firm, EQM Index, and have been involved with the creation of some successful thematic indexes that are out there trading as ETFs today, including the first online retail index, the first blockchain index. And then, my career kind of took a pivot in September of 2023. I sold my firm to Redefine, which has, been a great decision, kind of a match made in heaven from a resourcing perspective and allowing me to do more of what I love to do on a greater scale. And then, prior to that, I was a quant analyst and portfolio manager for 16 plus years. So my career has taken a lot of different paths, some of them sort of unintended and not things that I thought I would do. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. I come from I'm kind of a traditional Gen Xer who thought I was going to be with the same company, my entire life. And, that's not really, I think, a paradigm today. So, but it's been an exciting journey for sure.
Wonderful. When we started this podcast, almost all of our listeners, from what I could gather from the feedback, are in the industry. So they really understood ETFs, certainly understood indexing and all of that. And now we have really expanded out into the idea of leadership and the idea of what does it take in terms of hustle and curiosity and a lot of the other things that are intrinsic to our success as leaders. So just so that we don't lose some listeners here as you talk about what you do, can you explain just a little bit in a really kind of basic level of what is indexing and how it is so fundamental to our passive and now active ETFs as well?
Right. So, the ETF industry, has really, taken off. I'm sure your listeners can see the statistics. And, it used to be people would own typically mutual funds, as packaged investments in their 401ks or in their personal investment accounts. And today, the ETF wrapper has really kind of become the industry standard for folks that want to have sort of a diversified investing approach. So, things like the S&P 500, can be packaged in an ETF wrapper. That's probably one that typically a lot of investors own. And on the index side, there's both passive index-based ETFs. So that's kind of what I work on. We're kind of the rules and methods behind index products. And then to your point, there's also a lot of active products that might use indexes as well, either as benchmarks or as research reference universes. So even active ETFs are using indexes as well. So kind of maybe a less exciting part of the business, but I think the way we do it, we really do support our clients and we're really a partner in the process. So I'm very happy to be doing it at Redefine.
So tell me a little bit about starting a business around indexes. Did you have the idea of who you would be selling these indexes to before you created them, or did you have passion around the indexes that you wanted to see out there? What was the genesis of your idea when you were creating these indexes?
It's kind of interesting. I kind of categorize myself as an accidental entrepreneur. I was working for a big institutional firm, ended up leaving there. And one of my first consulting clients, as I was trying to figure out sort of what my next role was going to be, was in the ETF industry. And I really had no exposure to the ETF industry, but found it very, very interesting. And it was actually quite similar to what I was doing as a quant PM, because quantitative models are rules based. You're building something based on a set of rules and a methodology, and again, trying to beat the market. So, it lent itself very well to that. But one of the things I found out in that process is that I really do like building things. So the product development side of the business is really very interesting to me, whether it's, building an index product or, doing a home remodel. It was something that I found out about my personality is I really like this idea of taking an idea and then putting all these disparate pieces together to form something great and useful. So, that was something that I kind of found out about myself. I never envisioned being an entrepreneur, but it is very freeing. You end up wearing a lot of hats. You end up having to learn a lot of different things. It definitely took me out of the silo that I was in as a quant PM, just working on a particular segment of the market. All of a sudden now I needed to know about all different parts of the industry. And I kind of focused in on thematics because it was something that was of interest to me. There had been some successful products that had come out, and somebody approached me and said, "Hey, do you think, let's try to come up with some ideas to build the next big, thematic." And that was online retail. Of course, when we built that back in 2015, I didn't anticipate that we would have a pandemic where online retail would be the only form of retail. So there is always an element of luck to these things, but
Yes.
sometimes you just have to kind of go with your instincts and see how things play out.
And we have
And
some really smart listeners. So, folks are amazing when they send in their comments and questions and things like that. But maybe just pause just a little bit on thematic and maybe explain that a little bit to our listeners as well.
Yeah, so thematic investing is kind of interesting because you're actually trying to get exposure to some sort of theme or disruption in the market. So I think online retail is a perfect example, of retail has really been disrupted by, companies like Amazon, but then even, some of the smaller players. Like I think one of the top performing names in that index has been Carvana, which sells, cars online. And, back in 2015, I don't know that people really imagined that people would trust to be buying a car online, but it's become kind of commonplace today. When we first launched the index, it was kind of a stretch to think that people would be buying large items like furniture online, and yet there's all these people today that are buying mattresses and things like that. So that's what I'm trying to capture when I created the thematic index. Idea is what is a disruption. So some of the things today that are kind of interesting categories are things like humanoid robots, right? So that's going to be disruptive. In the future we're probably all going to have robots in our home. Things like drones obviously has become very disruptive. Defense can use these small drones as opposed to very expensive fighter jets. So those are the types of things that we're looking for, and these are not supposed to be sort of short-term fads. A good theme really is something that has legs for, let's say, a decade and is really truly disruptive and is going to change things. I mean, certainly the most common example today would be all these AI themes, which have really been disruptive to a lot of areas in the economy, and hopefully down the line will make our lives better.
Yeah, and it's exciting. I mentor a lot of younger women that, are looking at their, financial portfolio, and I really don't give advice at all, but it's really fun when they start talking about their passions turning into the way they invest. So,
Yes.
the way that and it just, to me, it's almost less about what the passion is and more about the idea of getting close to your money and close to the idea of how you can bring that, I don't know, that self-awareness, the excitement to managing money, which a lot of people end up thinking is just sort of, outside of the industry, just sort of boring and, not something for them. So I really feel like these thematic investing really helps people become closer to the thing that is going to decide, a lot about their life, their
Yeah,
finances.
I totally agree with that. And I think it's kind of a natural way to invest. People don't really think in terms of style boxes. So when you're thinking about
Right.
growth and value and
Right.
even the different asset classes, international, emerging markets, people don't really think in those terms. But thematics is one of those areas that everybody can grasp, even if you're in a different country, like if you're in Southeast Asia, it transcends geography. You understand, the themes that are changing our lives. So, I think it's a very powerful way to invest. And to your point, I think it gets a lot of people interested in investing, which is, I think, a good thing, not only for your industry, but also for people's personal portfolios, as they learn more and understand, what makes markets work.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about this pivot from entrepreneur to, working for, the company you work for now. How has your leadership changed? How is just even your day-to-day thinking about the work you need to get done? How is that pivoted both in your mind and in how you're actually behaving?
Right. Well, I think my career has been kind of a series of pivots. I was actually an English major, and yeah, I
Mm,
ended up pivoting to finance. I started my career as an advisor with Merrill Lynch, and then I pivoted to institutional money management. I started on the marketing side and then went over to the investment side. So there's been a lot of transitions. And I guess one of the things that, I have two kids that have recently graduated from college, and I've always tried to instill in them this idea that you have to be open to opportunity, right? That, there's not going to be a clear path. And when opportunities present themselves, if it's something you're interested in and passionate about, that you should pursue that, even if it doesn't seem, sensible or logical. You have to kind of, pursue your dreams. So, that's kind of what I did when opportunities presented themselves. I took some of those risks, and it's certainly turned out very well. And of course, there's always an element of luck. My current firm, has allowed me now to, pursue the work that I was doing as an entrepreneur at a greater level with more clients and larger clients. So I think it's actually been, a fantastic opportunity. And, people ask me today, do you think you might at some point, start another company? And, I think at this point I've kind of done that. And there's other things I want to pursue. Like I know you, Kristine, you're writing a book. That's something that I would like to do in the future. But I think can't be afraid to fail, and you have to, go after your dreams. There's a talking about not being afraid to fail. One of my current passions is golf. I'm learning how to play
mm.
golf, and I'm absolutely terrible, as are a lot of golfers learning how to play golf. It's something that you have to devote a lot of time to, but it's a very tough game, and you can't be afraid to fail. And you have these small successes that you just have to grasp onto. You sink a putt and you're like, oh, what a great game, as opposed to when you hit it in the water and lose your ball, or you're searching for your ball in the rough. There's a lot of ups and downs with golf. So I think that's one of the reasons that I'm attracted to it. It really is challenging, as opposed to, pickleball, which you can just, most people can pick up very quickly. I like the challenge of golf. And it is, very much like life. You can't be afraid to fail. You just have to kind of roll with it and take the challenges as they come and try to do the best that you can.
And I'm recording this right now from Maine, and so we are covered in snow and it's cold and it's even brutal sometimes to get outside and do the walks
You're not
that
playing
that
any
I
golf
need to
right
do.
now? Is that what
I
you're
am
saying?
not playing any golf. We do have an indoor pickleball court that our family just went to like last week, which was super fun. But golf. You are in San Diego, am I correct right now?
Yes, yes, on the West
So
Coast.
so how lovely that you can pretty much play golf year round. That makes it a lot easier to go from terrible to decent or
Yes.
whatever the word might be for golfers. But that's fantastic. I think that idea of being comfortable with our failures or comfortable with the process that it takes to get better is something that is a maturity in careers. I talk to a lot of writers, of course, that are starting out. And, for me, I'm, launching my debut. And actually, when this comes out, I will have launched my debut on the 20th of January. So that's, probably in the past at this point, which is kind of exciting to think about. But I think about the fact that the book that's coming out is actually the fourth novel that I wrote. And I felt like, kind of like with golf, I needed to like keep writing, understand what I was failing at, where I need to get better at, and just keep the process going until I got to a place where I was proud of, and, could stand behind a story that I felt was strong and thrilling. So I feel like that is something that for a lot of people newer to the industry or young leaders, it's really hard to not want to like hit the green on the first try. It's just a
Right.
very difficult thing to understand the kind of work that it takes to get good at what you do.
Yeah. And, I kind of think of myself now as a recovering entrepreneur. So when you're an entrepreneur, you wear so many different hats and you are available 24/7. You really don't
Mhm.
have any kind of work boundaries. So that's been one of the refreshing things now that I'm working for a larger firm. I'm not working on weekends. I'm not accessible all the time. I am setting some boundaries now, although it's very hard to do, you know, as a recovering entrepreneur, because I'm so used to not having those boundaries. But it's, I think it's a healthier life balance. You mentioned I'm on the West Coast. That's actually a really healthy thing for me as well. And I'm glad that I can still live out here. I'm more than happy to get up early in the morning to have, some daylight at the end of the day, free to go out and do things and, be active and enjoy the outdoors. And when I was a mom, because I mentioned I have two kids that are now college graduates, so they're, just starting their careers. It was great from a work-life balance standpoint. My husband would get them off to school, which was a much harder job, by the way, than picking up from school. I was kind of like the savior coming in to rescue them and take them off to all their fun activities. My husband had to get them ready, try to figure out how to braid my daughter's hair, which she finally just gave up and learned how to do it on YouTube. But it was really nice from a work life balance standpoint. So, for people that are thinking about a career in the financial industry, that's something to think about as well is, what are the trade offs, in terms of where you want to live, what kind of lifestyle you want to have. But I definitely recommend living on the West Coast, working those early hours, and then having your afternoons free to enjoy life a little bit in the afternoons and evenings.
Absolutely. That does sound like a really wonderful balance, especially when you have a partner like that that's willing to take the hours that are, difficult to then make work when you're on the West Coast.
Right.
And I was looking through some of our notes too before we got started, and something that really resonated with me as well was this idea of saying no. That's a really hard one for me. And with releasing a book, you just want to say yes to every opportunity that comes up. It's like, oh, can you speak at this? Or can you talk about this? Or can you bring your book here? And, it's like, yes, yes, yes. And then I realize, oh my gosh, I'm like overwhelmed by,
Yeah.
a great opportunity, but also, what is the impact of some of the things that I'm saying yes to? And then when I'm saying yes, I'm, definitely reducing the amount of time for more of my effective work. Like I need to be working on my second novel, which, will come out soon. So take me through a little bit of, is no a big kind of hard stumbling word for you? Have you figured out a different way of doing it? And, how is that pivot from entrepreneur to working for
Yeah.
Vedify changed the way you think about it?
Yeah, I think I'm just, I am learning how to say no, setting some of those boundaries, but I'm definitely being more selective with my time. So one of the things that I'm involved in is I helped co-found the Southern California chapter of Women in ETFs,
Yes.
in Southern California. So that's been really fun and rewarding because, one of the things that I do enjoy doing in addition to, building products is connecting people. So the networking, the industry collaboration, those aspects, that's something I want to say yes to. And I want to help others, connect and network as well, help them along the way on their careers. So that was certainly one of the things that attracted me to becoming involved with women in ETFs. Did I have time to do it? As with is the case with all these volunteer opportunities, it's really tough and you do have to be selective. But that was one that I really wanted to be intentional about and do.
And encouraging people to get involved and be able to tell the story of what organizations like Women in ETFs, which actually I really don't know any that have the kind of global reach that Women in ETFs does in our industry. But it changes careers, it gives people opportunities. It gives people opportunities to not only grow, but but pivot in their career. So thank you so much for running that chapter and doing the work that you're doing, because it will make a difference to folks at all their stages in their careers.
Yeah, I hope so. And so, at this point in my life, now that hopefully the kids are launched, I am being really intentional about, what I do in my spare time and want it to be impactful. So, thinking about things like, leaving a legacy, a positive legacy in the world and just making the world better. There's a great quote, be a fountain and not a drain. I don't know if you've heard that one before, but that's
Yes, of
my
course.
mindset right now, is to try to put out more positivity in the world, because we certainly need it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think when you do that, there's more of a reflection as well in your life. The more positive, the more that you are flowing over into others, there's splashback, and you get to
I hope
witness
so.
things that just make you feel good about the work that we do. So maybe as we start to close our conversation a bit, tell me a little bit about, as you are working with some of the younger leaders at Vedify now, what are you noticing about, the kind of next generation, and, what humble advice might you have if you were asked on being a success in this industry these days?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty impressed and
Mm.
hopeful as I see some of these younger people that I work with. I mean, these are some really smart people who, really seem to have their acts together. I think probably more together than than when I was that age, so I'm actually kind of impressed with their maturity and their skill level. So it makes me hopeful about the future. And when I look at my kids as well, I see them pursuing their passions. That makes me hopeful. So I hope more people, younger people, continue to go down that path. I mean, it's been a rough year, a few years, especially now with this move to remote working
Mm.
or hybrid working, because they don't have that face time in the office, the mentoring opportunities that
Right.
maybe I had early in my career, you know, but it's also nice to have those options. I have found I've worked remotely now, even before COVID, as I was running my company, and there are some really nice aspects to being able to work from home. I actually find it much more productive. There's a lot of distractions in the office, so sometimes it's nice to just have that time where you can just focus on the work at hand and not, talking around the water cooler. But although it's nice to have that social aspect as well, I think especially for younger people coming up, some of the things that I got to do, like, office happy hours and donut day and, things like that I take for granted, they have yet to experience that. And I think it's an important part of, you know, your career. And one of the nice aspects about the ETF industry is, coming from the institutional side, one of the things that I really amazed me about the ETF industry is how collaborative and collegiate it was, and how, everybody kind of works together and tries to help each other. So, hopefully, people that are involved in the ETF industry early in their career will be the beneficiaries of that, and experience what I experienced. Even now as it's becoming more mature, I still think that, that's a big aspect of the ETF industry. Certainly, it's been very supportive, obviously, of women. The reality in the finance industry is still that it's 80% men, but, things are getting better. And,
Hmm.
hopefully more women will consider a career in finance, because there's so many different roads that you can take, from marketing to portfolio management to, operations, legal, compliance. There's a lot of different things that you can do. So, and it's a great industry. It's a growing industry, which is nice. And, everybody's, I think, worried right now that AI is going to take their jobs, but there's so many things that you can do that, AI can't do, right? And one of them is the creative aspect. So creating new products or writing a novel, those are things that AI can't do yet. So those are probably the things that hopefully the future generation can leverage. And, AI will make them more efficient and effective at doing those things, but I don't think anyone is going to get replaced.
Right. And it's an evolution, and it's really my husband who's an architect, and we talk about this all the time with, AI and the pieces of it that, are taking over different elements of the design and build process. And so I feel like probably from my standpoint, I've been able to see, as old as I am, this full evolution of, when we first started talking about AI. And actually my second book has a big component of that in sort of the idea of investing. But I feel like the younger generation is coming up where, this is part of the job already.
Right.
So I think, I just have a lot of hope, like you do, for them that, they're going to find their place. And, there's just a way of thinking and the way of pulling together information that is going to supersede anything that can be created on a computer. So I'm very hopeful for that. I was also thinking about another piece that you said about, sort of the balance of working at home and coming into the office. We had a young woman come over recently for dinner. Fantastic. Big shout out to her. She brought over two gorgeous bottles of wine, and we had a wonderful evening with a whole bunch of people. But she was talking, she's an accountant, and she was talking about how, she is so productive at home now. When she goes into the office, that's sort of her don't get anything done day. Because now everyone is catching up, and so we talked
Right.
about when you don't get anything done, quote unquote, what does that really mean? And it just, to me, it sort of meant that that's about the amount of time, if you take like 8 hours over the course of a work week, where you are doing sort of that community building, the supporting, the understanding what everyone is working on, the being able to understand, mistakes that have been made and where, the business is going. All of those things have to be sort of condensed now into one day, as opposed to, 10 minutes in the morning and then, an hour for lunch on Monday. And, all the ways in which when we were in office all the time, it, was spread throughout the week. They sort of have this now condensed day where, all that's happening. So
Right.
I really do think that, companies do need to value that. People are going to find it, and they're either going to lump it all together or they're going to spread it throughout the week. But that idea of community and that idea of working together and supporting each other and all of that, that culture needs a place to breathe, no matter what the work remote versus in-person schedule might look like.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you can only have so much of a relationship with your coworkers, over a conference call, or, in the chat room, right? So, it really is important to have that face-to-face interaction. And it's actually gotten to a point now where I would meet people at conferences, and it's like, have we actually ever met before in person? Like, I couldn't recall because I felt like I knew this person,
Right.
due to digital interactions, but it's still important to have that FaceTime. And I think people want that. You know, talking to my kids, they're actually excited about being in the office. Um,
Good. Good.
so,
Yes.
and so I think they need that.
Okay.
And
Yes.
I think we're back to a place now where, people do want to go to conferences. They do want to have that interpersonal reaction. Vedify sponsors the largest ETF conference every year, and
Yes.
people are excited to be there. They're excited to learn. They're excited to collaborate with other people in the industry, and I think that's going to become the norm again, which is good.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's not wasted time. To your point, I think it's really
Right.
important.
So when we get to the end of the show, we always talk about books a little bit. It is a sort of a passion for me, and so just wondering, what have you read lately? Anything that, and if you haven't, is there something that's either been on your list or you've read in the past that you might want to give a shout out to that we can put in the show notes for our listeners?
Well, I was thinking about this. Of course, I am a voracious reader of, investment research and all these things that help. I'm voracious from that standpoint. I used to be a voracious reader, as you can imagine. I was an English major, a voracious reader of fiction, and I've kind of gotten away with that. So I would love to get back to that place where I could read for pleasure again. I noticed we just got back from a family vacation. My kids were actually reading real books.
Mm.
I think my daughter's fiance was reading Treasure Island. So I was like, oh my goodness, so it made me remember, it's like, yes, I need to get back to that place again. So I don't know, maybe I'll have to check out your book
Yeah.
and
Well, I tell you
and
what, after we get off, you'll give me your address and I will send you. I just got a big
oh,
box, so I'll
well, I
send
wasn't
you a
trying to get
book.
a free copy there, but yeah,
That's
I mean,
okay.
I love investment books. Obviously, Morgan Housel is one of my favorite authors, so I just read
Mm,
his latest book, and I like his insights, on investment behavior and people.
mm.
But it seems like I spend more time probably binge watching streaming media than I do reading, and I need to get back to that place where just I can sit down and enjoy a good book.
It really is fascinating to be able to use your mind that way. To me, it's a real release from sort of the passive watching of streaming or a lot of the work that we all do in terms of reading so many, you know, analyst reports and different things that go into our job. I feel like the idea of reading a fiction story that have really well-drawn characters and a cool plot just helps use your mind and light up your brains in other ways that we don't get to on our daily life. So, and I also think it helps you build empathy for different people in different situations than maybe we always get the chance to do in our daily life. So.
Yeah, I mean, the human condition is always fascinating, right? So,
Yes, absolutely. Well, Jane, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for taking your time to join us. I am really excited about the work that you've done, and now you're at Vedify, and so hopefully I will see you at a future conference. And thank
yeah,
you
and
so
I'm
much.
excited about your career path as well. So, good luck with your latest creation.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you, our listeners, for spending your time with us. I hope this is not just information, but you let it be transformational in how you think about your career. I'm rooting for you. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a rating and a review. Your ratings and reviews tell Apple that this is a podcast worth listening to. And in turn, your reviews will help We Talk Careers get in front of more listeners looking to succeed, just like you. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that follow button because there's going to be another brand new episode and you don't want to miss it. Until then, keep thriving. Thank you for listening.